As we stand here today and celebrate, commemorate, honor the name of Isaac Ochberg and the centenary of his heroic rescue of 187 orphans, I stand here today wearing a cap bearing his name and a shirt bearing the name of Isaac Ochberg. Both of these are relics of the 90th anniversary we had in 2011 when we officially opened this glorious Isaac Ochberg Park. There is, however, one essential difference, a major difference which I believe best illustrates, best helps us understand, appreciate, and really identify with what happened 100 years ago. The world today is living in fear. Fear of a disease, COVID. And this can help us understand the fear of these 400,000 approximately orphans that were in Eastern Europe in the Pale of the Settlement in the early 1920s. These orphans also faced a disease. It wasn't the disease of COVID, it was typhoid. And coupled with that, they were confronted with famine, and worst of all, in this cataclysmic cauldron of hell, virulent anti-Semitism, pogroms. These were the days, it was the hunting season and the prey was the Jew. In this scenario of hell, a letter came out advising, and it was an appeal to help save these orphans. And this letter found itself to the Jewish community's leadership in Cape Town, South Africa, where the challenge became, what can we do? How can we help? Obviously one can't help and save 400,000 orphans, but let us try and save as many as we can. And one man rose up to that challenge, and he was Isaac Ochberg. He was one of the richest men in South Africa at the time, most certainly the richest Jew, but he didn't pass the challenge on to others. He took it upon himself, and risking life and limb, he went to this Pale of Settlement in Eastern Europe, and by way of train, by way of horse-drawn cart, like the benevolent Pied Piper of Hamlin, he went and picked up one orphan after another from towns and Stettlich all over, and eventually brought them to South Africa, where they were divided between the orphanage in Cape Town, Oranje, and the orphanage in Johannesburg, Arcadia. Thereafter, these orphans would refer to Isaac Ochberg as Daddy Ochberg, because for most of these orphans, he would become the only daddy they would ever know. Later stories would emerge, like that from Charles Migdal, whose son lives today in Israel, in Renana. Chilling recollections of the freezing conditions with little clothing and no food. Quoting Charles, when he was 5 years old and he lived there, "I lived like an animal, not a human being." Or there was young Harry Stillerman, who would be an orphan at the orphanage in Cape Town, who had one arm. Why did he have one arm? Because when he was in the shtetl, the Cossacks came in on horseback, brandishing sabers. They shot his parents in front of him. Harry lay in the mud, a 5-year-old. He raised his arm up and to protect himself, and the Cossack came with the saber and sliced off his arm and left him to die in the bots, in the mud. But he didn't die, because along came the man from South Africa, Isaac Ochberg, who picked him up with the others and brought them to South Africa. One truly indebted in Israel to Daddy Ochberg was the chairman, the very first chairman of this Isaac Ochberg Heritage Committee, Benny Penzick. Benny Penzick from this podium in 2011 said, and this is why he's so indebted to Isaac Ochberg, because two of those orphans became my parents. He's the only one descendant whose both parents were orphans that Isaac saved. The most moving feature of this park is to my right over here, the Hill of Names, where embedded in rock and masonry are the names of the 187 orphans that were saved and the towns and shtetls from which they came. This park, I believe, is best summed up by a letter our committee received after we officially opened this park in 2011. It was from visitors from Cape Town, South Africa, descendants of the Ochberg, one of the Ochberg orphans. It was from Isaac and Henry Werb, who said the following, and they described their experience here in 2011 as our Ochberg experience in Israel. And he wrote, quote, "Our 12-year-old great-granddaughter was with us and we made her promise to come back to the forest with her own children one day to honor those who now rest in peace in such a beautiful and tranquil place. I see this memorial as the hull of a ship and the names of the plaques as portals gazing at a wonderful vista. I know that the Ochberg children have finally all come home." These are beautiful words. And I want to emphasize his last word, and that is the word home. Because what is lacking and what has not been told in the narrative, because home here means the state of Israel. And this is the most important aspect of Isaac Ochberg, because Isaac Ochberg was a visionary and he was a Zionist. He dreamt of a Jewish state like Herzl did, but like he rescued the orphans in 1921, he was not only a dreamer, he was a doer. And this brings us to why we have this park in Megiddo to Isaac Ochberg. Because in 1936, Isaac Ochberg left a bequest. He left a bequest to the Keren Kayemet LeIsrael, JNF, which to this day stands as the largest bequest ever made by a single individual to the state of Israel through the JNF. And it was with the proceeds of these funds, apart from being allocated to educational institutions in Israel at the time, like the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and the Weizmann Institute, that enabled them to buy the land, the tracts of land that we see around here, that became to Kibbutz Dalia, where I point to now, and further down the road, Kibbutz Gal'ed. These were kibbutzim that were established in 1937, Dalia, and in Gal'ed, 1945. They were kibbutzim that were established by young people from the youth movement Hashom HaTzair, Dalia, and Gal'ed by Habonim from Germany. If Isaac Ochberg was saving children in the 1920s, in the 1930s and thereafter, he was saving the next generations of young adults. I want to quote from you when we celebrated the 90th anniversary at this very spot, the words of Avinoam Binder, who at the time represented Keren Kayemet LeIsrael, JNF, who said the following, and I remember him standing at this podium and he looked back at this beautiful vista and then looked at the crowd crowd in front, and it was a crowd from people that came from all over Israel and the descendants who came from all over the world. And he said the following: Isaac Ochberg was a dreamer who made dreams come true. When he purchased the land here, the scenery was nothing like what we see from the lookout today. Ochberg dreamt that the Jewish people would come here to establish a Jewish state. This project is, in his honor, is to educate future generations of Israeli Jews not to take our many blessings for granted. Keren Kayemet Israel JNF is honored to take part in this project in memory of a man who believed in the future of Israel. End quote. I want to thank the members of the Isaac Ochberg Heritage Committee, both in Israel and in South Africa, who worked tirelessly to safeguard the legacy of Isaac Ochberg, but more important as well, to spread the important message. And what is that message? That message appears here on my t-shirt. It is from the Talmud, and it is, "He who has saved one life is as though he has saved the entire world." And that is the message that when we address on Isaac Ochberg to school kids both in Israel and in South Africa, and we say tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, do a good deed. It doesn't matter how small, because you never know the impact it will have on future lives. In the same way as Isaac Ochberg, when he saved 187 kids, the amount and thousands of people that are alive today all over the world because of that one act. One of my memorable moments was in 2016, when I went to South Africa to speak at the Limud conference on Isaac Ochberg and address all the Jewish day schools in Johannesburg on Isaac Ochberg. On the last day that I was in South Africa, and before I left to leave to return to Israel, I spoke at the Torah Academy for Boys. And I showed the movie and answered questions. And before parting, one young student who had just had his bar mitzvah asked, he said, "Would you like for me to blow the shofar?" And I said, "Of course." And I remember writing at the time, it said, listening to those ancient sounds that date back to the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, I reflected on that shofar blower who was probably no older than the orphans that Isaac Ochberg had saved 100 years earlier. And I thought of Isaac hearing those sounds and smiling. And I'd like to believe that Daddy Ochberg is looking down today from his celestial perch at all his children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, great-great-great-grandchildren who are today living in South Africa, in Australia, Canada, the USA, and of course here in Israel. And he's still smiling, and may he continue to smile for eternity and into the future. And that future will be as we further develop this wonderful, majestic, magical park, which we call the Isaac Ochberg Park, in this corner of South Africa here in Israel. Thank you.